We shift our focus now to Israel's southern border, where the country's defence forces announced it destroyed a sophisticated Hamas attack tunnel leading from the Gaza Strip into Israeli territory. According to Defence Minister Avigdor Lieberman, the tunnel was the longest and deepest underground passage discovered in Israel thus far, reaching tens of metres into Israeli territory. A military spokesman said the tunnel was dug by the Hamas terrorist group and was connected to a kilometres-long network of other passages under the Gaza Strip. It reportedly passed under the border in an area where Palestinian protesters have recently clashed with Israeli security forces. This as the Egyptian government expresses its concerns that the events of the Hamas return march in Gaza may spill over into Egyptian territory. Hamas has rejected an Egyptian proposal for it to calm tensions in Gaza in exchange for Egypt opening the Rafah crossing on a regular basis. We move into studio. Shai, Ben-Ari, Jordana Miller and Mohammed Al-Kassim still with us. Shai, kick us off. This tunnel was apparently found using very new technology.
Right. This is actually the 8th tunnel just since last September that has been found with this combination of technology that is currently being used to locate a lot of tunnels. There's basically a promise on the table to find all of the remaining tunnels by the end of this year. The Israeli security establishment very confident in its ability, and it seems to be with reason. It's a stunning pace that hasn't been seen before in terms of tunnel detection and identification and destruction, of course.
Now, Palestinian tunnel diggers were apparently working their way up to the surface to construct these tunnels, and it was only then that the IDF decided to close these tunnels off. Right. What's behind that?
It had been monitored for a while. Part of the consideration is they usually want to destroy these tunnels only when they reach into Israel while they're being monitored, of course, so there's no risk there. But in terms of the legal basis for it, it's easier for Israel to, or at least more legitimate, to destroy it once it reaches into Israeli territory. There have been 3 tunnels that were destroyed in Gazan territory out of the 8th since September. Those came in the context of responses against certain Hamas or other militant activity where the opportunity was taken to take out tunnel infrastructure inside the Gaza Strip itself.
Jordana, the accusation, at least by the Israeli government and Israeli defence forces, is that Hamas is using its aid money to build these attack tunnels. What evidence is there to back up those claims?
Well, I think the best evidence of this is if you look at the attack tunnels themselves. They take millions and millions of dollars to build. They are incredibly sophisticated. The concrete alone that is used, concrete in the Gaza Strip is a rare commodity. It's expensive. There's not a lot of it. To use it just to build these 8-foot-high tunnels, usually about 10 feet wide. This one was very, very long. They usually include air conditioning and heating systems and electricity systems. So really the best proof that Hamas is using the money is in the tunnels that we are finding more and more. And it's important to remember also that the IDF is spending a lot of money on the other side, $2 billion, to build a subterranean wall down that will prevent any tunnels from coming, and that's going to be, that has really basically shut down Hamas's strategy of tunnels.
Now, Mohammed, we also know that Israel is accusing Hamas of using the protests on the Gaza border as a way of almost covering up for terror attacks trying to permeate into Israel, they say, above and below ground. What do you make of these accusations, both the one that I posed to Jordana and this one?
Hamas has denied these accusations. They said that they want to keep these protests as non-violent as possible. In fact, in a speech last week by Hamas's head, Ismail Haniyeh, one of the first times ever a Hamas leader does not put behind him in a billboard any of the pictures of former or current Hamas icons, leaders. What did he do? He put Martin Luther King, the picture of Nelson Mandela, and the third one, if anyone can help me here, 3 pictures of non-violent Gandhi. That's correct. So it is show that Hamas is trying to keep those protests as non-violent as possible. Now, that does not mean that there aren't certain units, or even Hamas itself is working under secretly to have its members mingle with the protesters and try to do something. We've seen that. But the fact is, Hamas has seen that being non-violent is attracting sympathy from the international community, much more than even the Arab and Islamic world. And now they are changing, at least not changing entirely their ideology, but they're thinking that maybe this could be beneficial for them.
I think it's important for us to really question what's happening with these protests. I'm not sure it's clear even yet, because this was a protest that was begun not by Hamas. Hamas jumped on it and has very successfully hijacked the nonviolent peace protests. But there are reports now from Gazans that are taking part where they say, you know, we don't believe Hamas. We don't believe that they're peaceful. They were holding training rallies last week. You know, this is our movement, and we don't want it taken over by Hamas. So I think it's interesting that there's this tension. And I just want to say that on the briefing call this morning with the IDF spokesman, Conricus, he said that this tunnel was found exactly where one point of the protests are. The exit hole is right there.
The tunnel actually emerges in the very fields where we tend to report from. It's very close to home, that has to be said. Senior IDF officers who we spoke to Friday when the last protests took place conceded that, yes, a lot of this protest movement is certainly peaceful. You have elderly, you have children, you have a lot of women involved. But of course, the more youthful radicals who tend to approach the fence are the problem. They point to the fact that of the 33 dead, 18 of them have some sort of affiliation with militant factions, and they note that the major concern from the Israeli perspective is that if there is some sort of breach in the wall, and you have a situation where hundreds or thousands of these protesters are able to get through, they say that there are armed cells belonging to Hamas and other factions among these peaceful protesters, even some of the peaceful, youthful protesters, who in that situation could find themselves in Israel and who have the intent, they say, to even carry out an abduction. We pose the question to them, okay, an abduction is a casus belli for Israel. That's cause for war. So how does that sit with Hamas's, with the general knowledge?
Want to escalate tensions.
So they say that Hamas is willing to take that risk. For the prestige of an abduction operation, they are willing to take that risk and even risk war with Israel, even if it's not in their interest, because this is something that they see as capable of perhaps releasing prisoners from Israeli jails, an issue that we know Yahya Sinwar, one of the Hamas leaders, is very tied to.
I don't really buy into this theory. I think that Yahya Sinwar and the Hamas movement is under tremendous pressure, not only from the Fatah movement and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, but also from Egypt, that has been exerting tremendous pressure on them, and they are asked, in fact ordered, not to escalate the situation.
We also know, as you mentioned, that Egypt is calling on Hamas not to escalate the situation. It also has its own concerns about these protests spilling over into its territory.